Hey guys, now that we've successfully made it into 2018 and everyone's looking forward to the games that are coming out this year, I just want to take us back to early 2017. You know, when fidget spinners was somehow a thing and before YouTubers posted videos with corpses. Wait, this joke's already dated and overdone. Already? Oh Well, I'm going to be talking about a game that was pretty diverse amongst gamers. A game that you either really loved or hated, or just pretty much straight up disappointed in. This game, of course, is Mass Effect Andromeda. In this video, I want to discuss whether or not Andromeda was really that bad of a game. Before we proceed, I just want to make it known that I was a massive fan of the original Mass Effect games, and still am. In my opinion, the original Mass Effect games can be considered as some of the best examples of modern science fiction, blending interesting and likable characters with a universe that really felt alive and that you could actually feel a part of. Like, you weren't only flying around the galaxy boning blue space babes and unearthing some ancient ungodly evil, but also actively participating in the galaxy at large. You felt one of a kind, like you mattered as the first human Spectre, like your choices, no matter how small, had weight to them. Oh, and also Blasto. So, suffice it to say, when Mass Effect Andromeda was announced, I was pretty damn hyped for it. However, things didn't really go as planned. Upon Andromeda's release, there were many different problems that people had with the game, but there was one issue that soon became the focal point for the internet's collective disdain for the game, one that was always brought up whenever someone talked about Andromeda, and that was the facial animations. Now, I will admit, when Andromeda first came out, that the facial animations were, you say, very bad. They were stiff, wooden, and some other synonym for not being emotive. They weren't just bland and unemotive, but sometimes downright demented. I mean, look at some of these. Now, this was a complete departure to the original trilogy of Mass Effect games. I mean, even looking back on them now, even though they're not the best, they still hold up pretty good, despite coming out almost 10 years ago. Eventually, BioWare did release a patch that improved and fixed these facial animations, and it's a decent improvement over what it was, but ultimately it's a bit of a case of too little too late. Another problem that people had with these faces was that they were just so bland. For example, look at the Asari. Felt like they had all the exact same face. Compare this again with the original trilogy of games, and it felt like each character, no matter how small or insignificant, was at least their own person. They all had their own faces, small variations, maybe little scars or freckles, or maybe one person's face was a little rounder or thinner, and the nose was a little longer or flatter. Hell, there were even differences in Asari's skin tones. What I'm getting at is that when you walked through the Citadel in the original trilogy, it felt like you were walking through a crowd of vaguely different people. But when you walked through the station in Andromeda, all of the aliens just kinda felt like blank, identical mannequins. Now, this point is going to be smaller since I have less to say on the subject than the other points, as I feel there's simply not too much to say here other than the facts. When Andromeda released, it was, how you say, full of glitches. Now, the glitches that I encountered were mostly dumb, sometimes funny glitches that didn't really impede the gameplay in any way, but they did distract you and kind of take you out of the immersion somewhat. This was things like characters typing on the table instead of the keyboard, or NPCs blocking your way, and everything about the goofy walking animations. Some people, however, weren't so fortunate, and they reported a bit more game-breaking bugs, like literally falling through the floor of the map and having to restart from the last save. And you know what? I know that glitches are something that's always going to be part of games upon their release in some capacity, but that still doesn't really excuse it just at this level. It ultimately just felt like the game was rushed out far too quickly, kinda like how if you were building a house really quickly and you just forgot to check all of the electrical systems. Sure, you can still live in the house technically, it'll protect you from the elements, but it's damn annoying with all of the smaller problems. And in certain worst case scenarios, it could start a fire and burn the house down. Kinda like game-breaking bugs. So apparently Andromeda experienced something that could be mildly called a rushed development. This is probably the biggest factor as to why the game was shipped with so many bugs like this. They just didn't have enough time to adequately playtest before release. And that's tragic to me, because if they had enough time, I feel like most of this could have been avoided. Now, this next point is one that I personally find one of the most important. I'm a strong believer that the story and world building can make or break a game. I mean, some games can get away with a lax or minimal story and still be regarded as a classic, kind of like the original Doom, which gave us minimal pretense so that we could just go around and shoot demonic creatures on Mars. However, if a game comes out in a series that's most well regarded for its story, characters and world building, and it doesn't live up to this legacy, then that's just something that can really leave you disappointed. And this is especially relevant for a game like Mass Effect, which is well known and regarded for these things. Okay, and before we go any further in regards to the story, I just want to say that, actually I didn't really mind the plot itself. Thought that it was serviceable and did a decent enough job of introducing the new setting and characters. Some people, however, have criticised Andromeda's story for being highly predictable and cliched, and I'll admit, most of the big reveals that they drop throughout the game are honestly pretty predictable and you could see them coming from a mile away. But you know what? I didn't really care. Despite this, it was still an enjoyable ride of exploring the great unknown. Despite the fact that half their systems have already been explored by the Citadel races who arrived before we did and became criminal marauders and pirates. And blasting people away with the new combat mechanics, which I actually really loved by the way and thought they were an incredibly good improvement over the original game's combat. Speaking of the Citadel races, I just cannot stress enough how incredibly disappointing it was to only have the basic Council races involved. These being the boring old humans, the Asari space babes, the noble Turians, and the slimy Solarians. Oh, and there's Krogan too. Can't forget about them. Although I wouldn't blame you if you did. This was all honestly just so disappointing to me. Something that I really loved about the original Mass Effect trilogy was the sheer diversity of life on the Citadel throughout the rest of the games. I mean, you could walk through the Citadel and see all of the above Council races, plus some Volus, Elcor, maybe a Vorcha or two, a Hanar floating around, maybe a Drell, or a Batarian, even a Quarian. Hell, you could even see the little Keeper things scurrying about, doing their own little thing. You get the picture. There was a lot of variety that could be found within the previous games. It was a virtual melting pot of different cultures and ideologies, all of which ended up creating an interesting and immersive universe for the player to explore. Now, compare this with Mass Effect Andromeda. As I said before, there are only really humans, Asari, Solarians, and Turians walking about, and the occasional Krogan or two. And yeah, sure. You do meet another race down the line, and they do eventually come onto the Citadel 2.0, but that barely helps to make it any more interesting. This leads me to my next point, the new races that they introduced. The first is a race of Kiwi-sounding tropical people, the Angara, that can conduct electricity from their hands and can photosynthesize or something like that. I don't know. They're a little boring to be honest. The second race that they introduced was the main antagonists, the Ket, who are invaders from another quadrant of the Andromeda galaxy, and it turns out that they actually integrate other races into their collective with a weird black goo. Ooh. Wait, why is that so familiar? The third race is pretty much Protheans 2.0, an extinct alien race called the Remnant that has only left behind remnants. Oh, I get it now. Of their civilization, like colossal ruins and robots that have continued on after they've all died out, mysteriously. Oh, and they also created the Kiwi aliens too. Plot twist. And none of their plot threads are ever really resolved, and there's never any solid closure to any of this. Now, I wouldn't want all of the mystery to be taken out of these ancient space peoples, especially in the first game. But something to maybe, I don't know, tease our interests a little more, maybe some slight information on these guys would have gone a long way. Apparently, a lot of these complaints would have been addressed in the planned expansion that would have introduced the Quarian Ark, which carried the more exotic Citadel races like I mentioned before. But you know what? I feel like the Quarian Ark would have made an awesome addition to the base game itself. feel like that it should have been a long-running and involved quest where you have to track down the Quarian Ark and you need to plunge into the void between galaxies to save it. And once the Ark was saved, you could start to see all of the more exotic races start walking around the station and the colonies, and see more in-world references to them, and maybe get a related quest or two from them. That'd be fun. And since the Quarian Ark left after the main races and their arcs left during the Reaper invasion, I just think there could have been a lot more potential there to see some ties to the original trilogy. I don't know, maybe have some more cameos other than Liara in a voice journal before she met Shepard. Just saying. And if they were dead set on having some more DLC or expansions or whatever they want to call it nowadays, then there still would have been a lot of potential to explore things like the Ket and the Remnant. I don't know, maybe like taking part in a Ket civil war which was teased in the base game, and explore their culture and a bit more of their area of the Andromeda galaxy. Or hell, I don't know, even have an expansion where you join an alien archaeologist on an ancient Remnant space station or artificial planet and explore more of the Remnant and their motivations while still leaving some of the stuff to the imagination of the player. Unfortunately, however, EA cut support for Andromeda, so we're never really going to see any of this. No solid conclusion or closure at all. And I feel like this is the most tragic thing about Andromeda in my opinion. There was simply so much potential there that was missed, and unfortunately now, I don't think it's ever going to be realised, especially since the future of Mass Effect in general is in limbo. So, back to my original point. Was Mass Effect Andromeda a bad game? Well, no, it really wasn't. There was a lot that I liked, and while the plot was basic and predictable, it was serviceable and did what it needed to in order to take me along for the ride. I enjoyed most of the characters, and the new world itself was actually pretty interesting, and I really did love the new revamped combat systems. By that same token though, was Andromeda a good game? Well, also no. While there was some good stuff in there was a lot of bad elements as well, like the bugs and the missed potential with the story and the world building. Ultimately, Mass Effect Andromeda wasn't good or bad, it was just meh. While the original trilogy will remain a beloved classic that people are going to keep replaying, Andromeda was unfortunately easily forgettable and bland, and I just feel like no one's going to be replaying this much anytime soon. Anyway, that's all from me on the subject. See you next time.